Hey, where do you think you're going?
Home. I just finished my hearing.
Through the judge's entrance? I don't think so.
I'm Judge Dixon. I've been here until 9 p.m. on the Morrison case.
You're lying. Judges don't look like you.
Excuse me. What exactly do judges look like?
Not like some kid in street clothes. Back up before I make you back up.
What?
Those words, "judges don't look like you," would cost the city more than most courthouse renovations and end a security guard's 6-year career in a single moment. Federal Judge Carla Dixon had just sentenced 3 men to federal prison in a complex racketeering case, working past 9 p.m. to finish the proceedings. But to security guard Victor Kane, she looked like an intruder trying to access restricted areas. The tackle that followed would be recorded by multiple security cameras and witnessed by court personnel, creating undeniable evidence of the kind of assumption that destroys careers and costs taxpayers millions. Quick pause. I love seeing how global our community is getting. Let me know in the comments, which part of the world are you tuning in from today? Also, if you value independent storytelling that digs deeper for the truth, please hit that subscribe button. Your support is the only way we can keep exposing these untold stories. Judge Carla Dixon was 34 years old when she made history as the youngest federal judge appointed to the Eastern District Court. 6 months into her tenure, she'd already established herself as thorough, fair, and uncompromising when it came to complex criminal cases. Her legal mind had been shaped by 15 years of prosecutorial work, including 8 years as a federal prosecutor specializing in organized crime and racketeering cases. She'd earned her appointment through merit, not politics, with a conviction rate that spoke for itself and a reputation for preparation that intimidated even seasoned defense attorneys. That Tuesday evening, Judge Dixon was presiding over the final day of testimony in United States v. Morrison, a sprawling racketeering case involving 3 defendants accused of running an illegal gambling operation that had netted over $2.3 million in profits. The case had consumed her attention for 3 weeks, with complex financial evidence, multiple witnesses, and defense teams that objected to everything. She'd scheduled the evening session to accommodate a key witness who could only testify after business hours, extending the court day until well past 9 p.m. to ensure the proceedings stayed on track. Judge Dixon had dressed casually that day, knowing she'd be working late and wanting to be comfortable during the extended session. She wore dark jeans, a red blazer, and comfortable flats, professional enough for the bench, but practical for a 14-hour workday. She learned early in her career that comfort mattered during marathon court sessions, and as a federal judge, she had the authority to set her own dress standards as long as she maintained courtroom dignity. Victor Kane had worked security at the federal courthouse for 6 years. At 47 years old, he'd found a job after a brief career in private security that had ended when budget cuts eliminated his position at a downtown office complex. The courthouse job paid well, offered stable hours, and came with the kind of authority that Kane enjoyed. He took pride in maintaining courthouse security, knowing which doors led where, which areas were restricted, and who belonged in different parts of the building. Kane worked the evening shift twice a week, covering for colleagues who needed schedule flexibility. He'd been at the courthouse since 3 p.m. that Tuesday, monitoring entrances, checking IDs, and ensuring that only authorized personnel accessed restricted areas. His post near the judge's private entrance gave him clear views of the hallway leading to judicial chambers, an area he considered his personal responsibility to protect. The judge's entrance was sacred territory in Kane's mind. Only federal judges used that door, and Kane knew every judge on the regular roster. Judge Harrison, an elderly white man with silver hair. Judge Martinez, a distinguished Hispanic woman in her 50s. Judge Thompson, a tall black man who'd been on the bench for 12 years. Kane recognized them all by sight, knew their schedules, understood their routine. At 9:15 p.m., Kane noticed movement near the judge's entrance. A young black woman in casual clothes was walking toward the restricted door, keys in her hand, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Kane's mental database didn't include her. He'd never seen this person use the judge's entrance. She was too young, too casually dressed, too unfamiliar to be a federal judge. Kane's training kicked in. Unauthorized access to restricted areas was a security violation. Unknown individuals near sensitive locations required investigation. His job was to protect the courthouse, and that meant challenging anyone who didn't belong. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Judge Dixon looked up, tired after a long day, but not immediately concerned. Security guards occasionally asked questions, especially during unusual hours. She assumed Kane simply hadn't recognized her during an evening shift. Home. I just finished my hearing. Kane stepped closer, his hand moving to his radio. This woman was claiming to have finished a hearing, but no hearings were scheduled this late. The building should be nearly empty, except for cleaning staff and security. Through the judge's entrance? I don't think so. Judge Dixon's expression shifted. She'd been using this entrance for 6 months. Every day she held court. Her chambers were directly accessed through this hallway. The public entrance was 3 floors down and would require her to walk through the entire building to reach her car in the judicial parking garage. I'm Judge Dixon. I've been here until 9 p.m. on the Morrison case. Kane had never heard of Judge Dixon. He knew Judge Dixon from the appellate court, an older white woman who rarely visited this building. But Judge Dixon, a young black woman, claiming to be a federal judge, impossible. You're lying. Judges don't look like you. The words hung in the air between them. Judge Dixon felt the familiar combination of rage and exhaustion that came with being questioned in spaces where she belonged. She'd experienced this before during her prosecution career, but never as a sitting federal judge, never in her own courthouse. Excuse me? What exactly do judges look like? Kane's jaw tightened. This woman was arguing with him, challenging his authority, refusing to acknowledge that she'd been caught in an obvious lie. In his 6 years at the courthouse, no one had ever questioned his judgment this directly. Not like some kid in street clothes. Back up before I make you back up. Judge Dixon reached for her judicial identification, but Kane interpreted the movement as reaching for something threatening. His training told him to control the situation before it escalated. His bias told him that young black women didn't belong near restricted courthouse areas. His authority complex told him that anyone who argued with security was automatically suspicious. Kane lunged forward, grabbing Judge Dixon's arm and attempting to pull her away from the door. The tackle sent both of them stumbling, with Judge Dixon's shoulder hitting the wall, as Kane used his body weight to physically remove her from what he considered an unauthorized area. Get off me! I'm a federal judge. You're under arrest for trespassing and impersonating a federal official. 3 courthouse security cameras recorded every second of the encounter. Court staff working late heard the commotion and came to investigate. Within minutes, what should have been a simple identification check had become a federal civil rights violation that would cost careers, reputations, and millions of taxpayer dollars. The security guard who thought he was protecting the courthouse had just physically assaulted the youngest federal judge in the building's history, creating a case that would redefine courthouse security protocols and serve as a $3.8 million reminder that assumptions have consequences. Court Administrator Lydia Navarro was reviewing case schedules in her office when she heard shouting from the judicial hallway. After 23 years managing courthouse operations, she'd learned to distinguish between normal evening activity and actual emergencies. The voices echoing through the corridors carried the kind of urgency that meant trouble. Navarro hurried toward the commotion, her heels clicking against polished marble floors that reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting. What she found in the judicial hallway would become the most serious security incident in the courthouse 40-year history. Judge Carla Dixon was pressed against the wall, her red blazer torn at the shoulder, while security guard Victor Kane held her arm in what appeared to be an arrest position. What is happening here? Navarro's voice carried the authority of someone who'd managed crises ranging from bomb threats to judicial misconduct. Allegations. I caught this woman trying to break into the judge's area. Kane replied, still gripping Judge Dixon's arm. She's claiming to be a federal judge, but she's obviously lying. Navarro's expression shifted from confusion to horror. As she recognized Judge Dixon, she'd worked with every judge in the building, attended their swearing-in ceremonies, coordinated their schedules, managed their administrative needs. Judge Dixon had been appointed 6 months ago, and Navarro had personally overseen her office setup and security clearances. Mr. Kane, release Judge Dixon immediately. Kane's grip tightened instead of loosening. She's not a judge. I know all the judges here. She is Judge Carla Dixon, appointed to the Eastern District 6 months ago. You just assaulted a federal judge. Navarro's voice dropped to the tone she reserved for nuclear-level courthouse emergencies. The reality hit Kane like cold water. His hand released Judge Dixon's arm as if it had become electrically charged. The woman he tackled, the person he'd accused of impersonating a federal official, was actually the federal official she claimed to be. Judge Dixon rubbed her shoulder where Kane's grip had left red marks. Her voice remained calm, but carried the weight of someone whose authority had been violated in the most fundamental way possible. Mr. Navarro, I need this incident fully documented. Security footage, witness statements, medical evaluation for my injuries. Mr. Kane just committed assault on a federal judge and I want every detail preserved. Navarro immediately activated courthouse emergency protocols. Within minutes, the hallway was secured, security cameras were being downloaded, and courthouse staff who'd witnessed the incident were being interviewed. The federal courthouse had procedures for everything from natural disasters to terrorist threats, but no protocol specifically covered security guards assaulting the judges they were hired to protect. Dr. Patricia Santos from the Courthouse Medical Clinic arrived within 15 minutes to examine Judge Dixon's injuries. The shoulder impact had caused bruising and muscle strain. The tackle had scraped her palm when she tried to break her fall. Most significantly, the assault had been captured from multiple angles by security cameras that would provide undeniable evidence of what had occurred. Kane's supervisor, Preston Locke, arrived 40 minutes after the incident. Locke had managed courthouse security for 8 years and had never encountered a situation where his staff had physically assaulted a judge. His review of the security footage confirmed his worst fears. The cameras showed Kane approaching Judge Dixon aggressively, escalating the confrontation despite her attempts to identify herself, then physically tackling her when she tried to enter the judicial area. The footage was damning. Judge Dixon could be seen calmly explaining her identity, producing her judicial identification, pointing toward her chambers. Kane could be seen rejecting her explanations, growing more aggressive, finally resorting to physical force when Judge Dixon refused to leave an area where she had every right to be. Local news outlets began calling the courthouse within 2 hours. Someone had leaked word of the incident, though courthouse staff had been instructed to maintain confidentiality pending the investigation. The story was too explosive to contain. Federal judge assaulted by courthouse security. Youngest judge in district history tackled while trying to go home. Security guard refuses to believe black woman could be a judge. By 11 p.m., the initial incident report was complete. Kane had been suspended pending investigation. Judge Dixon had been medically evaluated and released. The security footage had been preserved and copied for federal investigators. Witness statements from 3 court staff members corroborated Judge Dixon's account and contradicted Kane's claims about the encounter. The investigation revealed disturbing patterns in Kane's 6-year employment record. While he'd never been formally disciplined, several courthouse employees had complained about his aggressive questioning of visitors who didn't fit his mental image of who belonged in judicial areas. A black attorney had complained about Kane's excessive ID checks. A Hispanic court reporter had noted Kane's tendency to question her presence in judicial areas despite her obvious courthouse credentials. Federal authorities were notified within hours because assaulting a federal judge constituted a federal crime regardless of the perpetrator's intent or employment status. The FBI would conduct a parallel investigation, focusing on whether Kane's actions violated Judge Dixon's civil rights under federal law. The courthouse's internal investigation would determine employment consequences, but criminal charges were now possible. Judge Dixon spent the evening in her chambers reviewing the Morrison case file she'd been working on when the assault occurred. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd just sentenced 3 men to federal prison for racketeering, demonstrating the authority and respect her position commanded. Hours later, a security guard had tackled her because he couldn't accept that authority when it was embodied by a young black woman. Kane spent the evening realizing his career was over. 6 years of steady employment, benefits, and security clearance were disappearing because he'd made assumptions about who could be a federal judge. He'd let his biases override basic professional protocol, and now he faced potential criminal charges for assaulting someone whose authority was protected by federal law. The courthouse buzzed with rumors and speculation. Staff who'd worked with Judge Dixon expressed outrage and disbeliefs. Security personnel questioned how one of their colleagues could have made such a catastrophic error. Administrative staff began reviewing policies and procedures to understand how such an incident had been possible. Media attention intensified overnight. The story hit national news outlets by morning. Federal judge assaulted by security guard at courthouse. Security guard tackles judge, claims she doesn't look like a judge. Young black judge physically attacked while leaving work. The headlines wrote themselves, each one more damaging to the courthouse's reputation and Kane's future. The courthouse that had operated smoothly for decades suddenly found itself at the center of a civil rights investigation that would expose not just one guard's bias, but systemic failures in training, oversight, and accountability that had allowed that bias to flourish unchecked. Within 48 hours, the assault on Judge Carla Dixon had triggered investigations at every level of federal law enforcement. The FBI opened a civil rights violation case. The Department of Justice initiated a federal assault investigation. The Judicial Conduct Board launched an inquiry into courthouse security failures. What had started as one guard's bias had become a multi-agency federal case with career-ending and million-dollar consequences. Judge Dixon retained attorney Daniel Greer, a civil rights specialist who'd handled high-profile cases involving police misconduct and institutional discrimination. Greer reviewed the security footage with the clinical precision of someone who'd built a career on documented injustice. The cameras had captured everything: Kane approaching aggressively, Dixon identifying herself repeatedly, Kane dismissing her credentials, the physical tackle when she refused to leave her own workplace. "This is as clear-cut as civil rights violations get," Greer told Judge Dixon during their initial consultation. "A federal judge assaulted in a federal courthouse by someone paid to protect her. The footage is undeniable. The damages are quantifiable. The liability is absolute." Federal investigators interviewed Kane under oath. His deposition revealed 6 years of unexamined bias and unchecked assumptions about who belonged in judicial areas. When asked why he'd rejected Judge Dixon's identification, Kane admitted he'd never seen a judge like her before. When pressed to explain what he meant, Kane's attorney advised him not to answer. The courthouse implemented immediate security reforms. All guards received mandatory bias training. New protocols required verification of credentials before any physical contact. Supervisory oversight was doubled for evening shifts. The reforms came too late to help Judge Dixon, but they demonstrated institutional awareness of the liability Kane had created. Community response was swift and damaging. The local bar association condemned the assault. Civil rights organizations demanded Kane's prosecution. Legal blogs dissected the case as evidence of bias in courthouse operations. Social media amplified every detail, turning Kane's face into a symbol of institutional prejudice. Settlement discussions began within a month. The city's insurance company reviewed the evidence and concluded that defending Kane's actions was impossible. Security footage showing a guard tackling a federal judge created unlimited liability exposure. The city attorney's office recommended immediate settlement negotiations to minimize financial damage. Although Kane's termination was announced 6 weeks after the incident, his personnel file, released during discovery, revealed multiple complaints about his aggressive behavior toward courthouse visitors. The pattern of bias had been documented but ignored, creating additional institutional liability. Judge Dixon returned to the bench with enhanced security protocols and a civil rights lawsuit that would fundamentally change courthouse operations. Kane faced potential federal criminal charges and a career permanently destroyed by assumptions that had cost him everything and would soon cost taxpayers millions. The deposition of Victor Kane became the centerpiece of a legal case that would rewrite courthouse security protocols and cost the city more than most annual budgets. Attorney Daniel Greer had spent 15 years deposing defendants in civil rights cases, but Kane's testimony revealed a level of institutional bias that shocked even experienced federal investigators. "Mr. Kane, you testified that Judge Dixon didn't look like a judge. Can you explain what you meant by that statement?" Kane shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his attorney whispering urgent advice that came too late to undo 6 years of documented prejudice. "I meant she looked young, too young to be a federal judge." Greer pressed forward with surgical precision. "Judge Dixon is 34 years old. Are you aware that federal judges have been appointed as young as 31? "I wasn't aware of that." "No. So your assumption about her age was incorrect. What else about Judge Dixon's appearance led you to believe she wasn't a judge?" Kane's silence stretched uncomfortably long. His attorney finally intervened. "You don't have to answer that." "Actually, he does," Greer replied, producing courthouse security footage from the past 6 months, "because we have video evidence of Mr. Kane's interactions with other courthouse visitors." The footage was devastating. Kane questioning black attorneys extensively while waving white lawyers through without ID checks. Kane demanding credentials from Hispanic court staff while ignoring white employees. Kane stopping black visitors in public areas while ignoring white visitors in the same locations. The pattern was undeniable, documented, and legally indefensible. Expert witnesses analyzed the security footage frame by frame. Dr. Patricia Williams, a forensic psychologist specializing in bias recognition, testified that Kane's body language revealed preconceived assumptions about Judge Dixon from the moment he saw her. His aggressive posture begins before any conversation occurs. He's already decided she doesn't belong there based solely on her appearance. The city's insurance company conducted its own analysis and reached the same conclusion as every other legal expert who reviewed the case. Kane had committed textbook civil rights violations in a federal courthouse, creating unlimited liability exposure. The assault was captured on multiple cameras. The bias was documented through years of similar incidents. The victim was a federal judge whose authority was protected by federal law. Settlement negotiations revealed the true scope of the city's liability. Judge Dixon's medical expenses were minimal, but the violation of her judicial authority created unprecedented damages. Federal judges are protected by specific statutes that carry enhanced penalties for assault. The courthouse's failure to train Kane properly, despite multiple bias complaints, created institutional liability. The media attention had damaged the court system's reputation, requiring additional security measures and public relations efforts. Preston Locke, Kane's former supervisor, provided testimony that sealed the settlement amount. Under oath, Locke admitted he'd received multiple complaints about Kane's behavior, but had never documented them formally. "I thought they were personality conflicts, not bias issues. I didn't realize the pattern until after the Judge Dixon incident." The city attorney's office calculated potential trial damages and concluded that settlement was financially inevitable. A jury trial would expose years of documented bias, creating punitive damage exposure that could reach tens of millions. The security footage would be played repeatedly, showing a guard tackling a federal judge. Expert testimony would demonstrate institutional failure to address obvious bias. The case was legally unwinnable. Kane's termination hearing revealed 6 years of complaints that had been disminimized or ignored entirely. Fellow employees testified about his aggressive behavior toward minorities. Courthouse visitors provided statements about his excessive questioning and inappropriate demands for identification. The pattern extended back to his first month of employment, when he'd questioned whether a black attorney really worked in the building. The final settlement figure reflected not just Judge Dixon's damages, but the courthouse's failure to address Kane's bias despite years of warning signs. $3.8 million represented the cost of institutional indifference, systemic failure, and one guard's unchecked assumptions about who deserved respect in a federal courthouse. The $3.8 million settlement announcement sent shockwaves through courthouse systems nationwide. Judge Carla Dixon's case had become the most expensive security guard misconduct settlement in federal courthouse history, establishing legal precedent that would reshape how judicial facilities train and supervise their security personnel. Daniel Greer announced the settlement at a press conference that drew national media attention. This case represents more than financial compensation. It demonstrates that bias has consequences, that assumptions destroy careers, and that federal judges deserve protection from the very people hired to secure their workplace. Judge Dixon returned to the bench 6 weeks after the settlement, presiding over complex federal cases with the same authority that Victor Kane had refused to recognize. Her first day back drew courthouse observers, legal reporters, and security personnel who wanted to see how the system had changed. Enhanced security protocols now required multiple verification steps before any guard could question judicial personnel, ensuring that what happened to Judge Dixon could never happen again. Victor Kane's appeals of his termination failed at every level. His union declined to contest the firing after reviewing security footage that showed him tackling a federal judge. His attempts to find security work elsewhere were blocked by the federal decertification that followed his termination. The 47-year-old former guard who had worked courthouse security for 6 years found himself unemployable in any position requiring background checks or bonding. The courthouse implemented sweeping reforms that extended far beyond basic bias training. New protocols required supervisory approval before any security guard could detain anyone in judicial areas. Mandatory monthly reviews of security footage identified problematic patterns before they escalated to violence. Enhanced background checks eliminated candidates with histories of discrimination, complaint. Most significantly, all security personnel now completed annual recertification that included extensive bias recognition and de-escalation training. Preston Locke, Kane's former supervisor, resigned 3 months after the settlement. His failure to document and address Kane's pattern of bias had contributed to the institutional liability that cost taxpayers millions. Locke's replacement instituted zero-tolerance policies for discriminatory behavior, ensuring that future complaints would be investigated immediately rather than dismissed as personality conflicts. The federal investigation concluded with recommendations that became mandatory for all federal courthouses. Security personnel training programs were standardized nationwide. Bias incident reporting became mandatory for all courthouse employees. Regular audits of security practices were implemented to identify problematic patterns before they resulted in civil rights violations. Judge Dixon used her platform to advocate for systemic change throughout the federal judiciary. Her testimony before congressional committees helped pass legislation strengthening protections for federal judges and enhancing penalties for courthouse security violations. The woman who had been tackled for trying to go home after work became a national voice for judicial security reform and civil rights protection. Kane never publicly acknowledged the bias that had destroyed his career. His brief statement through legal counsel expressed regret for the incident, but stopped short of admitting the racial assumptions that had led him to tackle a federal judge. His silence spoke louder than any apology could have, demonstrating the depth of bias that remains unexamined even after devastating consequences. The courthouse where Judge Dixon had been assaulted became a model for security reform nationwide. Visitors remarked on the professionalism and respect shown by security personnel who understood that their job was protection, not intimidation. The culture shift was tangible, measurable, and permanent. 2 years after the settlement, Judge Dixon reflected on the case during a judicial conference speech. "I was assaulted for being a black woman in a position of authority. The settlement holds institutions accountable, but real change requires examining the assumptions that make such assaults possible. We must ask ourselves, who do we assume belongs in positions of power, and what biases do we need to confront in ourselves?" The audience of federal judges, attorneys, and court personnel listened in silence, understanding that Judge Dixon's case represented more than one guard's bias. It revealed how unchecked assumptions, institutional indifference, and systemic failures can combine to create violations of the most fundamental principles of justice and respect. And if you believe that silence is the enemy of justice and that the truth deserves a spotlight, then please hit that subscribe button. We are committed to uncovering these harsh realities. We are committed to standing up for the innocent, for the judges, for the professionals who deserve to work without harassment. This goes beyond just one bad security guard or one viral moment. It's about deciding what kind of society we refuse to tolerate any longer.